Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 47. Is IAM asleep at the wheel? Question mark. Our guest today is Lasse Andresen, founder and CEO of IndyKite, and our co-host and guest today is Mushmi Banerjee, senior software architect AI at Okta. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to start today by showing a graph that is a little small, and I apologize to people who are looking at this on their phone, so I'll sort of visually walk you through it. But this is a graph that's in the homework. It's the McKinsey and Company report, lots of great graphs in there, but they're basically saying which industries will be impacted by AI. And they put in the very top right-hand part of the graph, software engineering for both corporate IT and product development and product R&D as the industries that will be the most affected by AI. And so I think that this really validates the idea that that the identity space is going to be greatly impacted by AI. So I think Lasse is spot on by that. I think Okta agrees with this graph. In their white paper, they say that few domains are well suited to the application of AI as identity. So I think Okta is completely on board with this. But of course, there are also few domains that are as vulnerable to new attacks than identity. And so I'll start with a question for Lasse. Where do you think this is going? And is AI going to result in more or less trust in our digital transformation?
I think it really depends on how good we are, because kind of like identity is definitely the core to any trust. Kind of like every interaction online, human to human to app, device to app, kind of like starts with some sort of identification or an identity. And if you can't trust where the data is coming from, like either through your keyboard or from an app or from an API or from an AI agent, you kind of the whole foundation is basically gone. So trust is based on identity. The more secure you can know about the real identity to a human or a non-human, that has a huge impact on creating trust and the outcome, of course, in AI. And look on AI agents, kind of like they are gonna automate a lot of things. They need a lot of data which are verified and identified to do the right thing, and they also gonna work on behalf of us in many ways. And how do you do that securely? How do you know who and which and why is this AI agent now doing something for me or for a corporation or for an app? So identity is core to the success of valuable, meaningful AI and machine learning.
I'm going to actually show another graph. And so this was from a Okta talk by Todd McKinnon. And let's see. The screen sharing on this is really, it is really not as good as Zoom. So this is actually a graph that, or a graphic that was shared by Todd McKinnon in one of his short keynotes that's on the Okta website. But I really liked how Todd put this, and he talked about AI taking data, applying a model, and resulting in actions. And I think that's a very useful way to think about it. So Mushmi, I wanted to ask you the next question, which was, Okta claims that AI enables powerful real-time actions and insights. But according to the website, how is Okta enhancing workforce identity in cloud? The answer seems to be mostly coming soon. And so as one of the leading engineers, can you talk about the kind of effort that it takes to build these models and how hard it is to find engineers and develop these teams? And what does it take this type of huge investment in compute that we've heard? So how do we actually, I see the vision, but how hard is it to actually get there?
That's a great question. The possibilities of AI, as you know, are broad and exciting. And at Okta, we remain focused on using AI for security, for user experience, and efficiency. So we've been working on starting with the threat identity threat protection with Okta AI. At we know that the user session, for instance, is more secure at the time of authentication, but as it passes through, the security level decreases. So we do constant evaluation of the threat, and that's done through AI and ML models. It automatically adapts to the risk coding to different contexts with Okta's proprietary ML model. Again, to coming back to your question, the amount of data that you need to train the model will depend on the use case. In this case, we need both the session and the user data, which we have. And then from a training perspective, it's customizing the models, it's building those models, and of course, improving the model. So it's a constant process which we iteratively go through and improve the model so that it becomes. Right now, we are able to detect multiple session risk and user behavior risk, and based on that, we can either log out the user or trigger a workflow. So those are some of the things that we already do. So again, going back to the question that you had, yes, it's a effort where we have to work very closely with partnership between the product, the data scientist, and the engineers together to come up with a model that works.
If I can add, first of all, I really like kind of like the way Todd kind of like have framed this. We have kind of like a similar way of thinking about it in IndyKite with kind of like capture, connect, and control. Because there's absolutely companion technology to AI, which is knowledge graph. So yes, the most interesting thing here is the data. So and how do you actually capture the data and know where it's coming from? Then you need to connect it. You need to understand the relationships and the context. Without you're flying blind. And then of course you have all the security controls that you basically need and be having for a long time around authentication, authorization, consent, and all these kind of things. But we are seeing the same thing. We just call it the capture, connect, and control.
It's interesting that you say graph, and I know that Okta is also one of the lead contributors for OpenFGA, which is a graph-based authorization model. And when you think about the data, the model, the actions, when I think about actions, I think about authorization systems. Can this person um, access this, do this action on this resource? So somehow I see this connection between um, authorization and AI that I hadn't really seen before I started researching this episode. Um, and also, um, um, but maybe Mushmi, can you talk about that a little bit? Do you see any intersection between? You mentioned that um, it's after authentication happens that maybe we can get more utility out of the AI strategies. Is that one of the reasons why you think that there's also a parallel move to investing in authorization technologies?
Definitely, authorization is a key. I mean, if you look at it, uh, when a user logs in, a session is established and you authenticated the user. But at the end of the day, you are allowing the user access to certain resources. So not only authorization, the governance also comes into place. The entitlements comes into place. So that brings to my mind something called governance analyzer that we are working on, which, for instance, for a good hygiene, for a good governance hygiene, we need to know if a person or a who's accessing the resource should be allowed access to a resource or not. Do I allow that entitlement to go through or not? And that is where an AI can help, because in this decision making process, because people get overwhelmed when they're, hey, do I allow this admin to access this resource? Do I not allow the admin to access this resource? So it's not just authorization, it's the governance and the authorization both that go hand in hand. Yes, and that's why we're focusing more on after the authentication, what do we do?
Lasta, I wanted to ask you sort of a business question, taking a step back. So AI seems like a match made in heaven for SaaS companies. It uses proprietary models, requires lots of capital, and it results in like real value for customers. Um, and but I wonder, sometimes the first mover ends up investing a lot in this new technology, but it's the second entrant to the market who makes small little tweaks that actually ends up, benefiting the most. Does it make sense for you? I mean, you just started IndyKite like a couple of years ago. Does it make sense for small companies to actually do this type of AI in investment?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think you actually can do modern software development without looking into machine learning and AI. Like it's going to be kind of like going backwards, how to speak. And of course, you have at least three big buckets when it comes to AI. You have tons of companies that are just putting a nice UI on top of ChatGPT and stuff like that. I think a lot of them is going to disappear really, really quick. Then you have the big guys, kind of like Google and the people that like OpenAI that can put millions and millions or billions of dollars into these insane big kind of like models and engines. And then you have the rest of us, at least from IndyKite, not being kind of like $1 billion company yet. We use this for all development purposes, for automation. Everything that can be automated will be automated. And if you look on identity and the explosion of things that are kind of like connected, like human and non-human, like role-based access control is totally dead. Trying to do these kind of things when something the old way of doing policies when it comes to authorization will not fly. There's too much dynamic things, too much stuff is going on. And then using AI and machine learning inside your technology, your platform, the way we are doing it and Okta are doing it, is really, really going to help this complexity. There's no way human being can sitting there and figure out, do I have every policy in place in the right way anymore, or how should I make a role-based access control to my enterprise? It's not feasible.
Um,
I
so,
just want to add to what Lars said. I agree
please.
completely with him. From Okta's perspective, we have access to a great deal of information around the risk of a user's authentication, the resource that a user is accessing, and other users have access in a similar resources or more. And we can utilize all of that to come up with meaningful insights. And doing that using a static rule-based policy is not going to scale efficiently as we see. So I
Yeah,
completely agree with what Lars is saying.
I'll just echo that. We call it this semantic digital twin, basically fingerprinting all the activities going on, not only authentication, but exactly is devices, application, human beings doing after they authenticated. And then kind of like after a while, you have a fingerprint. And of course, you can definitely use that for cybersecurity and see kind of like strange behavior. But you can also use it on the other side and say, okay, I see kind of like this user is very, very similar to the 15,000 other users on my system. Why don't I just suggest what kind of like access control and authorization rules should be implied in the situation, or even take it to the next step with recommendations from those types of applications. There's a lot of good stuff going on here.
Yeah. So Moshe, I saw on Okta's website, there's some really clear business values. Like I saw one use case where there was an article about how Okta reduced toll fraud. This was like sending like SMSs just to hike up the bill from the telco and then splitting the money. So that's a very specific, and real business value. But I'm wondering, what are the table stakes here? What are the use cases that we're going to see? Every business says we need to have these in CIM and workforce. So do you see any, excluding the sort of niche cases like toll fraud, what do you think is going to be some of the features that we just expect every IAM system to have in the future?
Yeah, the AI is a double-edged sword. For us practitioners, for technology, identity, and security practitioners, yes, and in the hands of not so evil people, uh, it's a double-edged sword. So we need to be very aware of the fact that the adversarial attacks are going to increase. We've already seen that some of the traditional SMS, voice, face detection, all of that will become extremely fakeable. We are already seeing that with deepfakes and other issues, especially for
Yeah,
science.
and we've had 2 episodes on that here on the live stream, and it's
Exactly.
terrifying. And actually, the best algorithms are only 95% effective at detecting deepfake.
Exactly.
So it's very real. Yeah.
I have myself tried a model where you can do even text to speech, audio. You can take a little audio snippet of a person and fake that. Now you can do it with the video also. So that liveness detection goes for a toss. The SMS voice call, all of that goes for a toss. The bot detection. So some of this will become table stakes. You'll have to come up with better strategies, either web author or some other strategies to protect against
Hmm.
some of these attacks. So that's for SIAM. On the workforce side, yes, the traditional models that we have would continue to work, but we have to invest more into uh, better governance, better security, better policy posture to prevent against those attacks. So I only see this increasing, uh, adversarial attacks increasing, and so both on the workforce and the SIAM side, those will become table stakes, and we need to prepare for those attacks.
Well,
And
Lassa, any thoughts on like what's the new like common denominator of table stakes for both consumer or workforce?
I think the one that we see the most, of course, kind of like I'm a European, and there's things are moving real. Something is from a governance perspective and compliance has been moving a little bit faster in some countries in Europe. But what we see is absolutely the consent part, that we have really nicely kind of like externalized authentication from the apps, but still people are putting authorization into the business logic. They're building it kind of like consent as a thing of the application itself. Consent is absolutely one of these things that actually should be externalized and be controlled by your IAM vendor's technology.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up question. One of the things you talked about in the blog you submitted was data provenance, and basically the idea of knowing that we can trust the data. Um, and if you can't trust the data, then the trust in the model goes down. And that was something I hadn't really thought about. But maybe you can talk a little bit about IndyKite's approach to building. How do we feed the data into these systems to know that the model is going to be trustworthy?
Yeah. So, so first of all, I think that feeding every data into kind of like a new data warehouse and stuff like that is not the way to go, because a lot of this kind of like signals the data is very dynamic. So you need to pick them up in real time if you're going to be ahead of the bad guys or making the right decisions. I think that's and again, of course, if if you have kind of like a piece of data, taking a blood sample in the health industry, for instance, if you don't know if this blood sample is from a monkey or a 7-year-old boy or an 80-year-old woman, that data is, what is it? It
You
has
could
not
mistrain
value at
on it.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and again, back to the context thing, I normally saying when I'm trying to explain kind of like some of the limitations with LLMs is it's purely statistics. Of course, you can do a lot of this, but if you look on 94% of the people that actually died in plane crashes last year, they were drinking milk. That is statistically correct, but you're totally out of context. So again, you need to add this in, and we see a lot of uptake in AI, kind of like RAG, and knowledge graphs working in parallel. And again, key the identity. Where is this data coming from? Can I prove it? Can I trust it?
Mushmi, any thoughts on? I'm sure you've become learned more about data and data provenance in the last couple of years than you would have thought possible. But any thoughts on the challenges around both getting the data and but also recording some of the metadata around the data so that as you reanalyze it, you can keep some of that context, as Lassa mentioned.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's for every data that we capture, it's extremely critical to have certain provenance details, where is it coming from, some metadata as to the source, so that we can attribute. So main problem with LLMs is when we generate something, if you're using say a pre-trained model, it's trained on a particular data set, right? It does not have context about your own data. Now, when Lars mentioned about RAG, we do use RAG. We've done RAG-based architecture at Okta. When we are augmenting the data that we are passing to the LLM with RAG, this metadata that you're talking about becomes extremely critical, because then we can attribute it to the source. So when a response is generated by an LLM, we can say, pinpoint and say, hey, this is where it's coming from. So capturing when we are capturing the data, it's extremely important to keep in mind what are the things that you need to tag, what are the things that you need to capture, whether it's what is the source of the data, what the file name, where is it coming from, what are the tags that you apply to that. That becomes extremely relevant when you're doing a RAG-based approach, or you're training an LLM and augmenting an LLM. So if you're thinking of a generative AI perspective, also this data provenance that Lars talked about becomes extremely important, and that's what we are seeing at Okta as well when we experiment with our generative AI products.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think also back in the heydays of identity, we talked about level of assurance. Kind of like today, kind of like it's more we're talking about trust scoring, which
Yes.
is basically you kind of calculate based on metadata you have to somehow say how much can I trust this data, and then again that will have an impact on how much you can trust the outcome.
Exactly.
Lasse, you mentioned, or in the blog, the IndyKite blog, it mentioned that you were applying some identity techniques to this problem of or challenge of data provenance. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what was the overlap?
So and it's basically what we already we're talking about, and that is of course a collection of all this metadata that we are associating with, in our case, the nodes in the graph. So and of course that is never static. So it's highly dynamic, and then the more metadata we can collect, and then our models around trust scoring can be hopefully more and more accurate. So this is what's going on in the background. We don't in our cloud platform, in the same way as kind of like I also will talk about that semantic digital twin that we are creating that also looks on the behavior. So it's a combination.
Mm-hmm. And how does Okta look at this? Because you have so much data at Okta, and Lasse mentioned that, well, you can't just put it in a big warehouse. And how does and now we're not just talking about the data, but we're talking about the metadata around the data. So now our data has exploded even more. What are some of the strategies, if it's not data warehousing? What are some of the strategies that you use to actually make sense of this, or make it useful to feed into these LLMs?
Data warehouse is still extremely relevant. I would not rule out data warehouse, because that's where we store most of the data, and that's where you capture the metadata associated with it. So in Okta, we use Snowflake as our data lake and the data warehouse. So that is extremely critical, where we have put extra information and the metadata in the data lake. But for a use case to use case basis, especially when you're training an LLM model, it's for a particular use case that you need the data. In that case, you go and fetch the data from the data lake, and then do certain kinds of things. Like, for instance, we just talked about RAG. You put it in some vector store, and you'll have to create that metadata, take the metadata with you and put it in the vector store, so that when you do a semantic search against the vector store, you also fetch the metadata that will be relevant when you pass it to the model. So it's based on the use case. For instance, when we create a generative AI pipeline, we get the data from the data lake plus with with the metadata, and then pass it through the vectorized semantic for the semantic search. So that's how it's working. And again, I'd like to add, it's not just the data, metadata associated with it. We need to pay close attention to the security of the data. Like, for instance, you do not want to pass any PII data, any confidential data or something like that to the LLM. So it's not just grabbing the metadata and all the data, but also scrubbing it, filtering it, redacting the information that you don't want to pass. collecting that data and then passing it to the downstream systems. So both comes into play, metadata plus the security and filtering aspects of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, it's kind of like it is this combination. Yes, of course, Snowflake and Databricks and these kind of things, it has a very important kind of like role in this whole picture. But of course, there's a lot of data which coming for sensors or real-time data and stuff that kind of like will not be there. So it will be a combination here to get the most accurate answer out in real time.
So flipping back to the title of the episode, and I'll pop that up again. Um, so I think we agree that the identity industry is going to be really impacted by this AI, paradigm shift. Why do you think, Lassa, that IAM is asleep at the wheel? It sounds like Okta definitely has their eye on it. Microsoft, who's getting a vast swath of like the new and existing business today, they seem to have their eye on it. So why do you think that IAM is asleep at the wheel with regard to AI?
Maybe because I think some the kind of like the wake up call has gone just kind of like started a little bit late, to be honest, and the kind of like insane focus on old stuff and still kind of you see a lot of identity niche companies that talking about removing password and stuff, and that's their word, and my biometric is better than yours.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, what Okta is doing, what Microsoft is doing, what we're doing is also taking into engineering. We are not only having an identity experts, we actually bring in the data science people, and it's actually going to have a combination of those skills and those two technology. Basically, magic will happen. So I think that's where some of the identity companies are still living in their own silo and think as long as I can do strong authentication, everything else is okay. You need to bring in two very different disciplines into this to actually take advantage of AI, securing AI, and make useful both models and outcomes.
Yeah. I don't. Mushmi, I mean, obviously you're the head of AI at Okta, so you don't think Okta is asleep at the wheel here. You're consumed probably 16 hours a day on this. But just at sort of a higher picture, um, do you think maybe um, the industry could be more focused on this? Do you think that maybe we're not talking about it enough?
We're definitely not talking about it enough. In, it's right now people have just woken up to the real threat uh, and how the threat landscape is changing with AI. So yes, there's a lot more education that first of all there's a lot more education that needs to happen. People becoming aware of all the issues that can go on. And we're seeing that. We're seeing some research where actual threats have increased because of the AI system, and companies will have to adapt to newer patterns, newer authentication, authorization, or governance patterns, or even change their systems to adapt to these threats. So from my perspective, yes, we are still slow. Okta is doing great at some of the work that we are doing, whether it's with the identity threat protection that I discussed earlier, governance analyzer, some of the work that we are doing with on the CIC side. So there's a lot of work happening, but yes, there needs to be awareness, there needs to be education. We're not talking enough about it. When I attend conferences and stuff like that, we're still talking about passkeys, FIDO. We are not I don't see us actively engaging in discussing some of these issues.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's the same thing that I'm seeing, and I think all enterprises all have enough data. One of the problems is, of course, that it lives in silos. But what we see in the industry, in an identity industry, is that the domain expertise also have been living in silos. You have the identity people over here, and you have the data science and kind of like team over here. You need to connect this.
Yeah, exactly. And data science people don't understand identity. Identity people are not an expert in model training by any means. So bridging that gap and working collaboratively with them is the key. Yeah.
Yeah, when I started building IndyKite and I hired kind of like my engineering team, it took actually, which is half data scientists and half identity. It took at least 9 months before they can talk to each other. Half kidding, half true, but they're coming from very siloed mindset,
Yeah.
and this is where we need to get together.
When I think about an identity team at an enterprise, you're right. There is generally no data scientists in that team. Um, and even in like the architecture stack, we have access management, we have governance, we have provisioning, we have directory services. There's no AI layer in there. Lasse, where do you think, if I'm an enterprise architect, identity architect, where does AI fit into that? How do I insert it into the stack?
First of all, I think you need to go down kind of like to, I don't know where the data management teams actually sits, and sit down and starting having this conversation, because it is a combination. I can think also AI and data management is blind without the identity side of it. So it's not kind of like that I want identity guys to become data scientists, but these skills needs to work together to actually create the great income. And this is, I see this is in enterprises I talk to, this domain expertise is very, very siloed still. And coming in and talking the other side to the other ones, sometimes you get just blank eyes, basically. But we see things are moving on. People are, of course, with knowledge graphs and AI technology, how fast they have evolved has, again, created some wake-up calls, and that's also why I say, hey, you better wake up, because there's a huge change in how we're doing this thing. And of course, again, there's more non-human actors connected in this paradigm, and even just kind of like dividing identity into workflow identity and consumer identity is very, very narrow in my mind.
Mushri, when I look at the Okta website, it seemed like the AI was like all the above. Like Okta's interested in like everything, it seems like they iterated out every possible application of AI. What would you say are the highest priorities at Okta, in terms of like shipping product? Like where do you see the most need for customers today tactically?
Uh, we are currently focused strictly on identity and security. So all of our AI offerings are geared towards meeting one of the two. Whether and also I'll also like to add IT admins efficiency. So if you think about it, it's the three E's. So there's efficiency, there's efficacy, which we are working towards, and of course experience. All three of them, but mainly focusing on IT efficiency and efficacy of the systems, making them more secure and new. So those are the two main areas that we mainly focus on. Of course, user experience goes hand in hand, whether it's the admin experience or end user experience. So we do keep that in mind as we build our AI offerings.
So I just want to make sure I heard that right. So security, let's say defeating this new wave of attacks is sort of like priority number one.
Yes.
And then priority number two is it maybe is efficiency.
Yes.
How about at IndyKite? What do you see as the highest priorities, Lasse, for the roadmap?
It's kind of interesting because I see the same technology and the same way of thinking can be applied kind of like both on the kind of like security side, but also on kind of like the user journey and the experience side. Because again, back to what we're doing with the semantic digital twin and basically fingerprinting behavior. Yes, of course, you can use that from a security perspective to avoid fraud or whatever strange access control or people or code or something doing something you've never done before. But the same technology, the same thing could also be used for kind of like creating a kind of like a recommendation engine. And the recommendation could also be policies for an identity domain for giving the right accesses. So I see the same technology can be used for so many use cases, and they are not kind of like mutually exclusive. And it's actually, what are you using it for? But it is the same tech, basically.
And lots of follow-up question there. So recently, IndyKite acquired 3Edges, and we had Alex Babineau on, I guess, a couple of weeks back. Can you talk a little bit about the logic of? It's very early for a company like IndyKite to make an acquisition. What was the driver behind that, and do you see an intersection with the focus on AI?
Absolutely, and I would say number one, the people, the skills, kind of like finding really, really senior your people these days, either in the identity space or graph space or AI, is really, really hard to do. And here I kind of like I found a very talented group of people that actually have been living and breathing this for a very, very long time, so they have the skills and kind of like hit the ground running with all their, and they've been also been out there in a lot of use cases and understand the issues and the problems. So that was number one. The other thing is, of course, most of our customer and we are fastest growing in North America, then again having people on the ground in that time zone has been very, very important for us. And when it comes to one use case, which of course there's a lot of talking about specifically in the identity community, is around authorization. And this has been one of the kind of like core focus area for a long time. So it just made total perfect sense for us.
Because it's almost like the authorization is the action. Like, so now you get this information, you do this, you have this data, you create this model, you come to this conclusion that you can do something, but unless you have the hooks into the authorization, you actually can't do anything about it. Mushmi, do you see a similar type of synergy there with, in order to actually use this, we need to move into authorization?
Yes, definitely. I mean, especially when you're trying to use AI, uh, there are two things that comes to mind. Like, the model is going to predict something for you. Now, there's some action that you need to take based on that model prediction. All right, uh, and you have to pipe that through certain systems. And usually in traditional identity management system, that is the authorization layer, right? Because that is where the decision happens. That's where the decision is taking place. So you take what you've got from an AI system, you pipe it through the authorization layer to say whether you're authorized to take this action or not. So from that perspective, yes, because AI is just going to give you an answer. It's not going to say whether it's going to say that whether you're allowed to do this action or not allowed, or give you a score. But at the end of the day, there's a downstream component. There's a downstream authorization server, which is going to say, based on this additional data that I got from the AI, do I actually think that the user should be allowed to perform this action or not? So yes, at the end of the day, it's the authorization, the governance layer that is performing the action piece in that uh, in the octane diagram that you showed, which Todd also mentioned, because that's the layer that's performing the action. The model is just giving you a score or giving you a risk score, whether or some other trust score.
Yeah, and when I kept reading that, well, AI can help you take actions and give you insights. And yet, when I look at the sort of marketing material out there, everyone talks about actions, and no one actually talks about insights. But what are some of the important insights that maybe the business users could get, and are those valuable? Are those insights valuable enough that business users would actually want to pay for them?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this question because insights is very close to my heart. Uh, I'll give you an example, and I think for folks in the identity management space would agree. Most of the time, the administrators are very reluctant to change anything, whether it's changing a policy or stuff like that, because they don't know what will break.
An ideal day is I go in and I don't have to do anything, right?
Exactly.
Everything
Help!
works.
Like, yeah, exactly. So if you can surface meaningful insight which tells them in advance that, hey, if you make these changes, XYZ will happen, like X number of users will get logged, or it gives them confidence before they can apply any of those changes. So in surfacing those insights, it's not just about AI or recommendations and stuff like that, but surfacing those insights. We've seen that time and time again where our customers have come and said that is extremely critical for them to get these insights before they can take the action, because uh, they usually don't just go and change production systems uh, without having a meaningful insight first as to how the system will behave when they apply those changes. So it's extremely critical that as a business person, we sit down and consider what are the insights that we need to surface, what will give the person who is applying this change confidence that they can or may not take this action. So yes,
Can you
extremely.
give us a specific example? Because I logically I agree with you, but I'm trying to think like,
I'll give you
is
an
it would
example.
it?
Say
Yeah, please.
you are on a, depending on where you are in your digital journey, you may or may not have adopted, say, phishing resistant authenticators in your org, right? You might be
Mhm.
using still uh, old authenticators or legacy authenticator system. Now, if I recommend you a policy which says go and apply phishing resistant authenticators, maybe 50% of your user base will not be able to log in when they apply this policy because they have not adopted phishing resistant authenticators or they're not enrolled into WebAuthn or passkeys. So surfacing that insight will give them an idea as to whether they should turn on this feature or not before they. So things like that. This is one example, but insights like that is applicable for every policy. So for instance, if I'm applying an authorization policy, what is the impact of applying this authorization policy, right? What
Lassa, any thoughts on insights that you can get or that you've been able to uncover by using AI?
Yeah, but I kind of like I like that use case just mentioned, but also if you take very different use case, I don't know if somebody has tried to call kind of like customer service in a big telco or a bank or a finance industry, and kind of like, and if you're so unlucky that from a telco you had both broadband, fixed line, you have video streaming, you have kind of like your mobile phone stuff there, and they treat you as seven different people. They don't have no clue that the same identity that actually is consuming seven different services from you is the same, or in the same household that the rest of the family.
So they should
So
be nicer to you.
they'd be very nice that they actually could treat me as Lasse and not kind of like, who are you? Why? Whatever. So that's a different type of
So
understanding
being
the
able to get
context.
insights about a customer, about more that's that you could deliver to an agent in real time to give them more context,
Of
so that they
course.
can seem like they know this customer
Yeah.
more intimately. Yeah.
And especially a lot people are doing a lot of M&As going on, and kind of like, yeah, some of your information is in one system and some other is in other systems, and again they treat you as five different people. It'd be very nice to have a common experience here.
Well, so this is one of the harder episodes for me to do because I'm not an AI expert, but we're coming to the end. Um, I'd like to ask for last thoughts. Mushmi, any last thoughts?
AI is extremely critical for IAM, as we discussed today, and it's shaping up. I'll encourage everybody to go check out the homework resources that uh, Mike shared for this podcast. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to answer them.
Lassa, last
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I think I just want to say thank you first of all, and secondly, of course, have your IAM team start talking to the data management team. I will promise you very interesting conversation and a good outcome.
Okay, next week we're going to talk about RBAC. Although Lassa said it was dead, I would posit it's not dead yet. There's still a lot of RBAC out there. And there's still reasons for that. There's still governance processes in place that work. I would agree that RBAC is not enough for sure, but it is still there. And so next week we have a talk with a guy who's been doing RBAC for so long, Sean McKinney from Simus. And they have an RBAC tool that's at the Apache Foundation called Apache Fortress. So we're going to talk with Sean about that. He's a great guy and he's super funny, and so we're looking forward to that.
Awesome.
And so thank you, Lassa and Mushmi, for joining us today, and thank you, audience. If you have any questions, I saw there's some chat. I apologize. I'm terrible. Oh, Rohit, thank you for your comments. I'm going to have to answer you on the. I'll answer you after the. We can keep commenting on the page to keep the conversation going. So sorry, Rohit, I didn't get to your questions. I try to pay attention to the guests and not the chat, but we will keep the conversation going. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next Tuesday for the next Identity Office Hours.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.